Well, earlier today we got a really interesting report from Jeff Snyder. The Hollywood Insider claimed that, quote, major parts of the upcoming Beyond the Spider-Verse had been scrapped, saying, and I quote, "I heard Sony scrapped most of the movie and is redoing a lot of it." This has led to a lot of hullabaloo online and some response from the creatives working on the project. So let's take a couple minutes to talk about what they had to say, what's going on, and whether Snyder is right or not. And quite honestly, guys, it's gotten a little bit, well, stickier. Now, earlier today, we were talking about a story from Jeff Snyder. Now, like we always like to say, if it's not from a studio executive or the studio itself, or somebody working on the project, we want to take it with a grain of salt. Now, Jeff Snyder is pretty known for some of his behind-the-scenes information when it comes to Hollywood productions, and he's typically pretty accurate with a lot of his predictions. He's also one of these so-called scoopers that doesn't hide behind anonymity, and that buys a little bit more, and that buys some credibility with me. Now, he said in his recent newsletter and over on Twitter that a lot of the upcoming third entry into the Spider-Verse, Beyond the Spider-Verse, had been scrapped by Sony. Now, this obviously got a lot of people's attention, and we actually did a story on it earlier today, and it wasn't shortly after that dropped we started getting information from people actually working on the film. Now, the first person to respond was actually Spider-Verse composer Daniel Pemberton, and he gave what was basically a denial. He said, "Don't really ever want to weigh on this sort of stuff, but would you ever believe there could sometimes be stuff on the internet that might not always be particularly accurate?" He posted this while quoting Disgusting Film, which was talking about this particular story and referenced the same source. Now, like we said, Pemberton's a composer on this project, and he definitely knows what's going on with the film, so that definitely tips the scale. Now, he did use the word particularly accurate, which suggests to me, at least in Pemberton's mind, that what's really going on is definitely not as bad as Jeff Snyder suggested, but might have some validity or some parts have been scrapped. The word particularly really is sticking out like a sore thumb. And maybe he wanted to choose his words better, and it doesn't mean anything, but we definitely want to make note of it. Now, shortly after that, Chris Miller of Lord & Miller chimed in, and he was much more direct. He just flat out said, quote, "Nothing has been scrapped, the reels are coming along nicely." Now, that is a particularly straightforward statement, and if we take Chris Miller at face value here, well, he's saying nothing has been scrapped, and this definitely pushes directly back against Jeff Snyder. Now, it's distinctly possible Jeff Snyder has bad information, and basically ran with a story that was simply wrong. People get stuff wrong all the time, and it's okay to be wrong when you can admit that you're wrong. So this story might ultimately not be true. But I do want to point one thing out. As we said, Pemberton said particularly, kind of making me feel like that might be something Sony has done before or might have done to this project. Now, Chris Miller's statement was straightforward, but these guys all directly work for Sony and are contractually obligated to basically hold the project together, and they sign NDAs, so they can't talk about any of these behind-the-scenes activities. I always want people to keep that in mind when people working on projects talk about the project they're working on. The parent company or studio sets the narrative, and they're expected and contractually obligated to kind of carry that water. So I really want to take this particular story, and we're going to put it up on the shelf and wait and see if we start hearing more bad news. This might simply be smoke from people working too hard, but often, like people say, when there's smoke, there's fire, and I do worry with Sony and their track history of simply screwing things up, plus the fact, like we talked about in the other video, that Lord & Miller just left other Sony Spider-Man projects due to some difficulties. Well, I would not be surprised if there's some behind-the-scenes things we do not know about, and I don't want to rule the whole thing out yet, but this story does not appear to be shaping up the way Snyder portrayed it. We're going to have to wait for some more info.